Good morning and welcome. I'm Barbara Giovanni, and this is Credo at Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. We have a great in-person turnout this morning. We have a number of people online, so hi to people on Zoom. This morning, our speaker will be Joe Spencer. He's been a member for over 50 years. And I thought maybe our good friend Lloyd Dillon might have beat him, but he's only been here for like 40 years. But he came to heckle, which he couldn't do if he watched online. But for the Zoom, people on Zoom, if you have questions, please post them and Paul will be reading those for us. So without further ado, we're going to have Joe come on up here.
Thank you for having me this morning. Due to our shortened schedule today because of the Credo, the GA that will be online promptly at 11 o'clock, we will have a shortened schedule today. I want to thank everyone for being here, and I'm going to basically just hit the highlights of my life and what brought me here today. Differing from other credos that you've heard, I'm going to illustrate a few points in my life with some poems. My life began in a little community north of Charlotte called Dorada, on the way to Statesville. I don't know if most of you know where Dorada even is. I've not heard too much about it, but it's basically a blue collar neighborhood, and we were a blue collar family. I grew up, my father was a welder. I had a brother and 3 sisters. We lived in a small house, and I worked to help support the family, cutting grass, bagging groceries, delivering papers, not all the way out there in Dorada. That was when we moved back into Charlotte, in West Charlotte, in my youth, and got my first paper out when I was 11 years old. Carried it till I was 14 years old. Got an Observer route and delivered the Observer until I went off to college and saved money for college. Helped my mother out with the expenses. I was pretty much a self-supporting child from about 11 years on. And then I went off to college to NC State, study engineering. Basically for 2 reasons. I liked learning how things work. And I also wanted a better life. And I saw how my father worked as a blue collar worker, coming home soaked every day from his job as a welder. And didn't want to live like that. And I knew that combining the 2 things, a little bit of interest in technical things and wanting to make money, that's engineering, doing engineering. So that's what I did. I had 3 sisters and a brother. We lived in a small house, like I've said, but I guess we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. So we were basically about as happy as we could be. I will say one thing about that paper route that I delivered from age 14 till I went off to college. There were a lot of hot Saturday and Sundays that the family would go to the neighborhood pool, and I was having to stay home to deliver papers and walk that route wet, hot. But at the end of the route, there was an A&W root beer stand. I always treated myself to an A&W root beer. And so the effects sometimes of an early job sticks with you all through your life. The thing that sticks with me is I can't walk by an A&W root beer stand without having an A&W root beer. Well, after graduation, I was off to a career in industrial sales. And then later went into teaching at York Tech down in Rock Hill, which is like our CPCC here in Charlotte, teaching in the engineering technology program. That was a wonderful experience. It allowed me to upgrade my knowledge. I thought I understood engineering. I'd taken the course at NC State, but I found that you don't really learn something until you teach it. And so that was an experience. After, and that also gave me my summers off, which a lot of people like to relax. Teachers don't do much in the summer, but I wanted to make some extra money. So I went to work for small and architectural and engineering firms in the Rock Hill area. Did that for a couple of summers, and then one summer worked for a larger A&E firm up here in Charlotte and learned my basic design skill, which was designing heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems for industrial plants. And if you want to know more about that, see me after class. It's a fascinating topic. Also during that time, I studied for and took my state boards to become certified as a registered professional engineer, which is, most people don't know what that means, but basically if you are in a building or going over a bridge or anything that can kill the public, if it fails, it has to be designed and stamped by a professional engineer, and that's what I did. I also wanted to have my own business, a consulting engineering firm, and I did. Well, let me go back. I worked for a couple of other larger architectural engineering firms here in Charlotte, designing larger things than I did down in Rock Hill, and I can tell you about those larger things later if you're interested. But basically, that's allowed me then to start my own business. It was myself, an architect, and two other engineers. It was a very busy, productive time in my life. We worked on jobs mostly in North and South Carolina, but as far away as Minnesota and New Zealand. Give me to tell you about the New Zealand job sometime. The specialty that we offered in that work was failure analysis. That doesn't mean much to you as a non-engineer, but it's basically engineers who are trained to look at failures and determine the cause of the failure. And so I did a lot of investigative work for for insurance companies. So we had a hospital that collapsed up in the UNCC area during construction. Nobody probably remembers that, it goes back so far. But we were one of the groups of engineers that solved that problem. We've looked at bridge collapses, almost looked at a dam collapse, which I was about to collapse, which I was asked to redesign. I said, no, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot. Looked at, well, anyway, I won't get into war stories too much. You can see me after class and talk about war stories. What led me into engineering, of course, was that I had an interest in science and technology. But since we're in a religious setting here, I'll also talk about what led me to the Unitarian Church. The same thing that led me to engineering. An interest in science and rational thinking. I had grown up in a conservative religious environment, but unlike many of you, I didn't have traumatic experiences with that. Vacation Bible school, and then on and on and on. We had the hellfire and brimstone minister at our local church. Jesus died on the cross to free your sins and all that. I didn't have traumatic experiences with that. I just began to question this. This is not logical. In fact, it's even cruel to think like this. And so I went through becoming a doubter, to an unbeliever, to what I am now, basically an agnostic, which is where I spend most of my time. Sometimes I think I'm a believer. Sometimes but most of the time I'm an agnostic. If anyone is interested in converting me, becoming more of a believer, You can do that after class, you have a beer, and I'll buy the beer. Tell me how we get something from nothing. If you can tell me how that happens, I might become a believer. So, going on with it. So some of the other directions that my life took, let me see, I'm supposed to talk about personal life a little bit. I was, of course, very busy and socially and professionally, and dated a lot. And one day I happened to cross this lady named Kathy, and she just about knocked my socks off. And I was always very conservative when it came to spending money, because I had to make my own money growing up. I watched every dime. And relationships, emotional relationships. I did not want to be in a bad marriage. I've seen those and thought that was hell on earth to be in a bad marriage. And so when I was in my dating relationships, if something looked suspicious, I usually dated for the horizon. But when I met Kathy, I was knocked off my feet. And if anyone had told me I would meet someone and be married to that person in 6 months, I would have thought they were crazy. But I did. Married Kathy, and it was 43 years of bliss. No, I shouldn't say bliss. We had our ups and downs, but it was 43 years of a good thing, very good thing. So let me tell you a little bit more about how I came to write a little poetry. Does everyone remember the events around?
According to NCBI, memory accuracy depends on individuals' differences in how they have experience. Although most individuals can remember details.
Does everyone remember the events around when you made a significant change in direction in your life, at least in
According to Wikipedia, it's not yet apparent which events of the past 20 years will have the same memory impact for the next generation. A few examples.
Anyway, I had always been interested in and took a lot of interest in exciting things or beautiful things as I was growing up, and wanted to capture those memories. And so photography became an interest in, or a hobby. At about the age of 12, I was, of course, delivering in the papers and making a little bit of money that way. But I still remember the details around that first camera that I owned, a Minolta SR10. It cost $35, which is a lot of money for me back then. I bought the camera at Van Ness Camera on North Tryon Street from Mr. Brown, who I thought since I bought the camera, I could get free camera lessons or photography lessons, which was just me basically standing at the counter and asking him questions about f-stops and shutter speeds. And he was patient with me ad nauseum. And today, photography continues to be my major hobby. And I'd also just like to say that you can all become photographers much easier than I could back then. Because back then you had to calculate and think about f-stops and shutter speeds and film speed and get it all work to get the good picture. Today, this little thing in your pocket does all that thinking for you, and you can take pretty good pictures. It'll take candid pictures as well as the best 35mm camera, which you're going to see a little bit of now. Like I said, I wanted to capture the moment, so I took pictures. I also wanted to capture the mood. So that's when I began writing about events and scenes and episodes that I was involved in. And so I've got a computer full of essays. You string these together and you've got several novels. And I realized that, this is okay, it's fun to sit down and write an essay. And I began to read the essays and see that, if I take this line out, and take that line out, I can make this into a poem. And then you've got, I think, a better product than an essay. So that's what I did, and started writing poems, which I've gotten more serious about, and do more of that in the last couple of years. So I'm going to hand out some handouts, and you're going to have to do a lot of sharing because I didn't think we were going to have this many people. But half of them here and half of them there, and you're going. I'm really going to strain your necks to see these together, but you'll hear me read it. I was looking for about 10 people today because of this new school. For example, this first one here, it's called Seaweed in Flight. Seaweed in Flight. And I'm giving you this, or showing you this, to illustrate my interest in both photography and poetry. I wrote the poem under the picture. Let me read the poem to you. Seaweed in Flight. And that's it on the screen. Everybody wants to turn around. You can see ostrich. You can see the photograph. You can't read it, so I'll read it to you. Seaweed in flight. Every creature can serve another, a higher purpose. Even seaweed can take flight and become the Starship Enterprise, Road Runner, or the beauty of all creation revealed. Very short poem, which I like. Yeah, it talks about the photograph very well. Another interest of mine as I was growing up that continues to be an interest today was fishing. We had a small pond in the neighborhood, and I used to spend a lot of time down there fishing, and I continued with a little fishing all my life until I got to Charlotte and joined Trout Unlimited and started with my first experience with fly fishing. And for a while, I was an instructor with Orvis over at Phillips Place on Saturday mornings, taking groups of novices like you that thought they wanted to learn to fly fish and showing them, teaching them the basics of how to fly fish with a fly rod and a little jig setup. Fishing, I had some great experiences fishing and wrote a poem about that. It's called Romancing the Stream. So if you will pass those around and read it, you can read it online too. Maybe you can see it up there. You have to share those quite a bit. Let me have one. I'll read that to you. This is an example of an experience that was so strong. I came back to the office and couldn't work for several days, 2 or 3 days. I just kept seeing these images of this great experience I had on this stream. And if you don't think walking up a mini waterfall, water rushing over the rocks with a fly rod in one hand and balancing with the other hand and trying not to fall down, because if you fall down, you're going to tumble all the way to the bottom. That gets your attention, and you do that for a weekend. You're not going to forget it. And then you catch a fish in the middle of all that and have to get that in while the water up to here is rushing behind you. It's really an experience. So I wrote about that experience, and here it is. Can't read it. Let me see it. Read it. I'll read it out loud, and you listen closely, and it'll make a little more sense. First light unveils her, shimmering in still darkness. Swift currents guide an uncharted path or treasures hidden within her depths. Softly, I step, balance, step, wade, balance, stretch, footrest to footrest, stout rock to silky bed, to sunken log, some polished and refined, some velvety, some loose and capricious. Like a baby learning to walk, I whisper as I teeter over the slippery shapes. The sun has joined us now, revealing her power and beauty. Crashing rapids play like a brawling brass band, trying to pull me into their quarrel, taking no notice of my frail baton. Mystical forms, fissures, and black holes threaten to topple me. My heart races. Surely a sharp tug on this sure line would do me in, I murmur. The headline would read, Angler in the prime of life, drowned by 6-inch brookie. Like an unready lover, trepidation turns to pleasure with her frigid yet sensual massage. For a time we touch and talk, my quiet thoughts, her subdued roar, until she's not so threatening as before. After lunch and rest, I miss her touch, her moist breath in my ear, the sight of her splendor. And so, wanting to be closer, I leave the waiters on shore. In our passion, I am swept away, yet I feel safe in her embrace.
Joe, can I interrupt you for just a second? If you all will turn that poem sideways, this is your shape poem in the shape of a fish. And you, when we talked about this, I remember you read it here several years ago. And we talked about this and you said, gee, I don't have that. Can you send it to me? You never sent it to me. This is it.
Yeah, you're welcome to it. So that's one of my hobbies. The other was sailing. I've spent more time on Lake Norman than everybody in this church put together, messing around with sailboats. If I spent the time studying for a degree as I did messing around with sailboats, I have a PhD, maybe two. I used to race up there every weekend. Something else that we can all have some common experience with is COVID. My experience with COVID was different than your experience, I'll bet. And I wrote a poem about it. Here it is. Hallucinations, which is on the back side of that sheet I think you've got. That's spelled H-E-L-L, hallucination. You'll need to sit for 15 minutes before you leave, the sweet nurse instructed. Sure, I said, before I froze, then dozed, lest anyone suppose I was having a COVID vaccination reaction. As silence fell, there came the flu-like neck swell that typically signaled impending hell. Then was the sound of a distant bugle, followed by the hoofbeats of the cavalry charge into the sinister creatures that surrounded me. Sounds of slashing steel and anguished screams filled my ears. Bodies and body parts flew out of the skirmish, covering my once pristine landscape. Then, as quickly as they came, they rode off, leaving only the dead and dying to mark the battle. Once again, the regiment from Fort Immune had saved me. So, I have other poems that I won't take a lot of time with. Did you say we had till 10:30?
Yeah, but we want some time for Q and A
Q&A,
and then
okay,
coffee.
some time for Q&A and coffee, okay. I've been warned not to go off on a tangent with my poems. I can sit here and read you poems, and I have that book. I will have a chat book that's coming out for some time in the near future. It's been a labor of love for about the last year or so, putting together 30 or 40 poems into a chapbook, and it's hopefully will be available over at Park Road Books in the near future. Let me read you one more that I'll have to find on my computer, so bear with me for a minute. Called, again, it's when I get angry about something political that's going on in the world around us, I write a poem about it sometimes. And this is my anger about what's going on, what has been going on, and you can tell what it is. It's called Don't Make Mother Angry. We've mucked around with her long enough, and she ain't gonna take it anymore. Her climate, her soil, her oceans, we robbed in the name of the almighty dollar. The same almighty that gave us supersize and made us all fat, dumb, and happy. Harnessed to debt we could not afford, we fed bankers while our souls starved. Her patience with us finally run out. Like water, she sent little COVID to find a crack, to widen and make a flood. She sent little COVID to do a little culling.
Pretty good.
So that leaves us some time for Q&A.
Paul, are there any people on Zoom who have a question?
Yeah. So which cell votes did you raise?
I had a J24. Everybody put that down and look it up. It's a great vote. It's like the America's Cup vote that you and I could afford. It has all the bells and whistles, and it's very fast vote. And if you had ever went sailing with me during a race when there was fair wind, if you weren't scared to death, you would probably be hooked for life. It's so exciting to race. So
You still race for sale?
once in a while I get a crewing position with someone, but I don't have a boat anymore. I will also say sailing is the most time consuming hobby you can have, horse and golf.
The dichotomy of being immersed in technology with the engineering and immersed in art with the poetry, which do you enjoy more, and do you see any conflict in the two?
No conflict at all. I've always been interested in art. I just basically didn't have the background, the impetus, the parents that pushed me that way. I wanted to support myself, get out and make a living. So I studied engineering.
Yeah.
If I'd come from a little different background, a motherhood, if I'd had a painting set when I was a kid, I might have been a painter or a writer, but turned out I was an engineer.
We have another Zoom question.
We have a comment. Joe, what a wonderful melding of an engineering mind and poetic expression. have you written any poems specifically in response to your UUCC experiences?
That you can talk about.
Well, here's a poem about my my experience with religion as a child. And this is not very deep at all. It's called Blessings. My childhood home became a branch bank before being bought by the Church of God, who introduced me to Vacation Bible School. Hallelujah. Delivering the afternoon paper in August, he gave me a deep thirst and an obsession that continues today. I cannot turn down the A&W root beer. Praise you, Jesus. Fishing the neighborhood pond gave me an appreciation of Mother Nature, reflection, and the world lying below the surface of everything. Praise the Lord. So that's my vision.
Joe,
Karen.
would you bring some of your poetry to a humanist meeting?
What I'll do is I'll bring this. I'll bring your pocketbooks. Yeah, this is another poem that about religion. I have a real problem sometime when I'm around fundamentalists. I mean, we got to go like oil and water. So this is a poem called Escape from Certitude. I want to unmask the cheery voices behind these scenes. The cutting down of the large pines that shade their simple home. The convoluted love for animals recently given away. The clutter, disorganization, single-mindedness. The assurance that he is coming soon. Their forgiveness of this sinner. Their cheery bliss. All masking certitude that in his name I will be saved.
Paul, are there any more Zoom questions or
Well, yes, well, Lincoln who asked about
the
sailboats.
sailboat?
Denise has a question.
I'm asking Paul, if anybody else.
Yeah, so Lincoln also said that he sailed thistles for more than 50 years, which has, and this is in a technical sense, it has the same Portsmouth rating.
That was just a comment.
Yeah, just a comment.
Okay,
Any more?
and in the room, Denise?
Okay, well, first a comment. One of the things I learned in insurance training class is never own a boat, but always be friends with someone that owns a boat. Like that. And the other is, how do you feel that your ethics and growing up in hard work, it's clearly transferred into your hobbies. Most people never achieve their hobbies, never achieve their dreams, and you clearly have really worked at them and grew them.
I know you won't believe me because this is not something that I wear on my chest, but I can be quite obsessive. When I get interested in something, it's like a bulldog that's got you by the ankle and won't turn loose. And that's the way I have been about some of the things you've heard me talk
You're
about.
passionate about.
And I know that some of y'all have tried to recruit me into your causes.
But every time you walk across the coffee room and see me, you want to recruit me into the humanist group. I'm surprised you haven't brought up yourself, anything about your involvement with the humanist group.
Well, humanism is just natural for me. I mean, you are all humanists and don't know it. You believe in rational thinking, science. Is that the basis under which you live your life? Then you're a humanist. And religious folks have a lot of trouble with humanists because we don't look to a deity or an outside authority, or especially a religious authority to tell us how to think, how to live, what to do. We can do that for ourselves, and it will always turn out well if you're honest with yourself and if you're living a rational, good life. Someone asked me, well, what is your basic religious belief? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's all you need. You don't need all of this fighting and nitpicking that religious organizations do. I mean, we've got 4 Baptist churches on one corner. Each Baptist church is supposed to be different. Down the street, you've got 3 Presbyterian churches, Lutheran church. I don't think they could even tell you what's different about them, and I know I can. Okay, next question.
The first one, what denomination was your family grew up in? And second, did your siblings go on a similar divergent religious path?
Well, I grew up in a Presbyterian church, Camp Green Presbyterian. I think it's still there. The minister was, I think it was Dr. Owens. But anyway, the thing I remember about him, and I did appreciate at the time, was that he was a hellfire and brimstone type minister. He didn't talk in this tone. He yelled when he spoke, but it was not off-putting. At least it didn't put me off then. I appreciated the passion that he felt for what he was saying. I probably didn't understand it, or I didn't object to it strongly, but I appreciated the passion. He could rattle the windows in that church. And he was a rather small man. And I still, I can't say I appreciate the passion of evangelicals, but I appreciate the passionate leader, which is, don't get me started with, this is our main problem with our leader today. He's not passionate. He's got great ideas. He's done great things, but he does not have passion opinion. Next question.
Okay, so let mine be the last one. if you
Okay.
Will, and then we have time for coffee and conversation before the next major event. You, like some others in our congregation, have had a close family experience with dementia. Is there something you would feel comfortable about sharing about that experience?
Well, just an offhand comment. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. It's a very trying and difficult for not only the person that has it, but everyone around her. But on the good side of that, Kathy and I were never closer than at some period during that transition. And her personality changed along the way. We became very close at one point. I think I've written a poem about that somewhere. I don't know if I'll publish it or not, because it's very scary. Very scary. Every now and then when I forget a name, I forget something. Oh my God, this is happening to me. Okay, next question.
That was it. Thank you so much for this.